all know it's coming. We can look at the demographics. We know how top-heavy our population and world population is going to be. We also know about the growing percentage of people with neurodementia. And that is going to be something that's going to bankrupt our country and other countries in the next 10 to 15 years unless we do something about it. And where the innovation is coming from right now is through digital medicine. And one of the big parts of digital medicine is virtual reality technology. And there's a whole plethora of areas of focus, which I'll go through pretty extensively, but it runs the gamut from better training clinicians for surgical procedures, but also team training. Our body will go into some of the system sheets developed to help with that. For better assessments, clinical assessments, everything from physical medicine to behavioral medicine, better interventions, particularly in behavioral medicine, and I'll describe why that is. And then after that, how can we support wellness using virtual environments? Now, how many people have had a chance to try a high-end virtual environment? Well, that's great. A few years ago, I think probably one or two people would have, actually a few months ago, probably only one or two people were raising their hands. So it's getting out there. They create a pretty profound experience. You know when you get a camera. They create a pretty profound experience. And that profound experience can be used in a paradigm to change our behavior and our impressions of how to interact with other people. And it's a very powerful tool. I'll give some examples of how that is. Okay. All right, great. Let's go ahead. That's okay. So the whole spectrum of healthcare is being affected by virtual reality technology, ranging from prevention of wellness, better assessments, improved adherence, behavior change, telemedicine and distributed care delivery, and better management of chronic conditions. And almost every technology player is putting a significant amount of money into this. As Mike mentioned, we just got back from visiting with some of the players over in China. The government there is putting tens of billions of dollars into VR as the next computer platform. And they are viewing it as a major part of their healthcare system. They're going to use it to train their clinicians. They're going to use it to provide telemedicine interventions for their population, try and reach underserved areas. And when we talk about VR technology, it's not just VR, which is at one end of the spectrum. It's really immersive technology. And at the other end of the spectrum is augmented reality, where we overlay the visual field with extra information. And it doesn't always have to be a head-on display. We can have a cave-like room where people step into and can have a shared virtual experience where we're capturing motion, changing the point of view based on the dynamics of the room. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. The good news is, even though VR has really made a surge forward recently, the research labs for the last 20, 25 years doing some basic research. If you go to PubMed, you'll find thousands and thousands of studies validating the approaches and paradigms and heuristics that can be used. So even though we need to redo many of those studies using current VR technology, the basic principle and understanding what does work has been worked out. So if you're interested, for example, how VR can be used to address an anxiety disorder, there's research literature giving us guidance on that. So again, the whole spectrum of interventions is covered by some of the basic research that's been done. It's frozen again. I think since I only have a minute left and it's frozen, I'll conclude by giving you an example of one of the projects I'm doing right now that I'm particularly excited with. My colleague Rebecca Mandel is here also. We're doing a stress inoculation project where we're working with children who we know weeks in advance what the worst day of their life is going to be. They're scheduled for invasive cardiac surgery. So we're capturing with 360 video the whole patient journey, starting in the parking lot, goes to the registration desk, going into the prep room, the recovery room. And we're allowing them to go through that journey in advance by using a VR system at home. We'll send them home with the system after they first come to the clinic. And most importantly, they'll meet other kids who've gone through that procedure. The idea is inoculating them against the stress experience and also sending them along with some digital interventions that they can practice, learning how to do mindfulness training or relaxation therapy, other interventions. So again, it becomes a telemedicine platform that allows us to reach them in ways that we otherwise could not do it. I'll be around afterwards to talk further. I'm particularly excited about the tools that we use VR for behavioral medicine, helping in psychology and psychiatry. Kim's going to go into that in a little bit more detail. But it's opening up some tremendous avenues for helping with addictions, helping with mood disorders, anxiety disorders, helping with stress management, helping with general cognitive behavioral therapy as a platform for interventions. So Mike, I'll turn it over. Who's next?
Okay. Howard, thanks. Howard Rhodes, a little presentation.
Hi, I'm going to spare you the slides. I'm Howard Rhodes. I'm the CEO of DeepStream VR, and we're a VR software company. We're building applications for a range of healthcare applications, but okay, I've got 5 minutes. A range of applications, but primarily for helping people with pain. And I'll just start by saying, when I started in VR years ago, the HMD weighed 7 pounds, and a portable VR system required 2 people to lift it into the van. And so I'm really excited about where we are, both in terms of the quality and the cost, and what we're able to do in terms of how it's been able to penetrate into society. What we've been looking at over all of those years is, what is VR good for? And we found that pain relief is really one of the best applications of VR. And it is more than just, I would say, more than just distraction. So we can do targeted applications. And so I guess I want to start out by saying sort of I'll present this kind of in the content of business model, since all of you are professionally aware of the healthcare market. I think that we have what I call the AHA model, which is using VR as a way to enlighten people. We've done applications, for example, on lifestyle change, and inspiring them to understand the problems and getting them to change their habits. The ROI from this comes from some sort of downstream behavior. Either they're more compliant, or they're using products better or something. The sort of second level is general wellness, and the work that we do in pain relief really falls into this category. This is I had a discussion before, but this is either no claims or class 1. So it falls into the general wellness categories, and if you're not aware of the FDA guidelines on general wellness, that's actually a really great thing to check out. But those applications, we're using VR as a way to help acute and chronic pain. And acute is in a procedural situation in a hospital. We can use VR as a way to help people escape that situation, and they get active, and they're not just sitting there passive and feeling helpless and depressed and in pain. And we see effect sizes of 50–60% for really intense pain, such as third-degree burns. So that's really exciting. And on the other side, we have chronic pain. So we're using VR as a way to help people with neuropathic pain and different kinds of conditions to change that pattern, change that negative cycle of pain in the brain. So we go out and we build these applications. We're delivering them to hospitals and clinics, and that part is very exciting. And that sort of falls into the general wellness category, as your no claims class 1. And then the last one is we can actually target, as Walter was mentioning, we can actually target specific conditions, disease states, different kinds of populations with VR, and create targeted therapies for things that are not really very well treated now. And those would be sort of class 2, class 3, and in terms of your return on investment, you get to, you go to the FDA, but that becomes a barrier to competition. So as you think about this, and you think about what this is a great bunch of people, and they're all my friends, so I'm excited to be here. But as you think about what they do, think about how to integrate that into the business that you do and the kind of things that you do every day. And I think we're seeing VR transform from something that is futuristic and weird and out there to something that is really a part of our everyday lives. So I'm excited to be part of that, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, Dr. Dan?
Hello everyone, great to be here. I was very excited to see how many people of you actually put up your hands when you said, when they asked for high-end VR. So I'm talking to people who are very familiar with VR, I think. Very few slides really. So, I have a company called Syntax. It's a recent startup. I've had companies before also. And our focus is on the area of healthcare, training, and education. So I'll show you some of the things we do and talk about VR relative to this. The first thing we are concerned with is you're going to educate people. All of you know this. We don't have an engaged learner, you have to learn. Our approach is very specific. We use micro-learning, which works for adult learners. Brief experiences, 5 to 15 minutes max. And anything you want to teach is going to be teachable within that, or else put it into the next module, next piece. We gamify where appropriate. In some way or the other, you have to give people some sense of whether they learned. Whether you call it feedback, scoring, leaderboards, real games, some sense of, okay, I'm getting it. I get it conceptually, and I'm really doing well at this. Put them together, they're called serious games. And we have seen clearly that serious games produce engaged learners. And this goes across the board. They can be millennials who are so accustomed to technology, all the way to people who should be retired but love work and they're continuing and they enjoy it. VR is an overlay on this for me. It is a way to take something that's very interesting, useful, that works, and now make it so immersive that they are literally in that environment. So I'm going to show some of the ways we do it today and talk about the potential. Besides the engaged learner, I think if you want to be in business, you have to fit into the enterprise somehow. A cool app that requires someone to go off and do something differently and come back. It's very difficult to convince a hospital or a company to buy enough of. They buy one or two. So some of the things we do to make sure that the enterprise finds it easy to engage us is we give them whichever platform they want, from the phone all the way through laptops, web, VR if they want. We use high fidelity. We found that in healthcare, while there is a role for cartoon-like, simple graphics and animations and simulations, healthcare professionals like to feel that this is their world. They can relate to it. And so you have to have good fidelity of equipment, environment, and functionality and events. It has to integrate into their scoring system, their learning management system, and they've got to believe in your team. We do a number of different things. We're very client-driven. I did try with my previous company to be very myself-driven. I produced what I thought would be really useful, and I think it is actually, except it was really hard to sell. I made this team-based learning environment, which is a video game. It's a video game platform, but it's a hospital or a clinic or a war zone or an earthquake in a city. And all of you get in there and you have to find your victims and your patients and deal with them. But what we found is that it's single learner games, simulations are ones that seem to be much easier to get your clients to buy into. And so one, for example, is any kind of cognitive learning. In a simulation, it's just so much more interesting, so much more engaging, and they really do learn. Smart people learn even if you give them a sheet of text, but they learn better with simulation. And these are 3D simulations. You can walk around in that hospital in that operating room. People might be familiar with virtual patients. This is one of the biggest areas of healthcare training simulation. You get a patient, you have to collect information, talk with them, get the tests, diagnose multiple diagnoses, and decide what to do. And ideally, we ask them also to justify what they decide. Mentoring, it's really good to be able to have a character in your game or in your simulation who's also the person who's guiding you through it. And we found that you can string together very modern simulations with even old PowerPoints as long as there's a good mentor. And we do any amount of custom simulations, so crisis management of emergencies, protocol training that's extremely boring, we let them in the sequence, simulations of situations, activities, and so on. So that's really sort of quick run through of what we do, and happy to answer questions later. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is James Blah. I'm the CEO and founder of Vivid Vision. So what we do is we use VR technologies and new sensors as well to measure diseases of the eye and in some cases treat them. So the reason I initially started this company is because I was born with a lazy eye. So I have both a crossed eye and a lazy eye, or amblyopia and strabismus. And so I went through most of the sort of common treatments as a kid. So still the most common, actually I can start with this. So yeah, about 17 million people in the US have lazy eyes. So it's roughly 1 out of 20 have either a crossed eye, a lazy eye, or both. And so only about 40% of those cases is it successfully treated in childhood. And so for a long time, there was sort of this concept that of the critical age, so at about 9 or 10, it was believed that the brain was no longer plastic enough to treat lazy eye. And over the past 6 or 7 years, there's been a lot of new research showing that that's not quite the case. It gets a lot more difficult to treat after that age. There's a couple of things you can do. And so today, patching is still sort of the first line of defense against amblyopia or lazy eye. So the idea is that you cover up the good eye, so you force the patient to use just their weak eye. And so if they're not able to depend on their good eye, you're sort of making their brain depend on the weak eye, which should incentivize it to learn how to use that eye better. But the issue is that kids absolutely hate this. So when I was a kid, as soon as my parents left the room, I would take it off. They tell me to wear it for anywhere from 2 to 8 hours a day at school. When I had it on, I couldn't read the board, I couldn't read my textbook, couldn't watch TV, play sports. So kids, don't really know what's going on, and they're really, really good at cheating. So I would peek out the side of a little sliver of good vision on my good eye, just angle it just right so I could use that rather than using my entire weak eye, which I couldn't really get any use out of. So lazy eye is it's sort of commonly believed to be a muscle problem or a physical problem with the eye. And problems like that are what typically cause it in the first place, but they're not actually the sort of root of the problem. And so the most common way that people get a lazy eye is that they are born needing a higher prescription in one eye than the other. And so while they're young, one eye is clear and one eye is fuzzy, and so their brain sort of takes the shortest route to the best vision and starts ignoring, it learns to ignore that information coming from the weak eye. And so what we're really working on is a perceptual problem. It's not a physical problem. And so we're basically teaching the brain how to use the two eyes together when normally there's not a strong enough incentive for the brain to change how it's learned to deal with the information. So we've sort of taken all of this, looked at the current treatments, and we've released a product to optometry and ophthalmology clinics. So we're using, right now, we're actually using the Oculus Rift, and we send these systems to clinics so that they can treat and measure patients who come in. We're in about 50 clinics across the world, mostly in the US and Canada. So yeah, here's a map of all the blue spots are the clinics who have it now. So starting to get pretty good coverage. So we have a number of research collaborations as well. So we've been working with UCSF, their ophthalmology department, and then we've also been working with optometrists and vision scientists at Berkeley, the University of Geneva, and SUNY. So I just want to say thanks, and I'm excited to kind of talk on the panel and discuss some of the issues of VR in healthcare.
Now we'll bring up Dr. Bowen.
All right, wow, people are up to such amazing things here. I hope I can be helpful. I'm kind of here to talk about the mental health world and how I'm using virtual reality. So I direct the neurobehavioral lab and clinic at Stanford and have just recently opened a virtual reality clinic and lab. And so I'm kind of a newbie to this world. I was a bit skeptical, to be honest, about how exactly I was going to be applying this, but I did research some applications that are out there commercially to use with patients, and have actually found it quite effective and helpful, especially in the way that I can customize and get very specific with intervention. So I am trained in cognitive behavior therapy and in dialectical behavior therapy, so much of the products out there help me deliver this therapy. So, you know, I've been using the traditional VR. It's kind of boring at this point. You know, there's a nice evidence base for it, but it is helpful. So for exposure, that's people that need to habituate to cues. It's been very helpful for PTSD, phobias, panic, generalized anxiety. We also are using it with distraction for pain and distress tolerance. And then also it's, I think, going to be even more useful down the line are skills training, using it for learning. For right now, we've got modules on relaxation, mindfulness, diaphragmatic breathing, progressive muscle relaxation. But I could see this extending to more emotion regulation skills and other CBT skills. So I did a bit of research in setting up this lab and tried different platforms, and really the only one I feel that's been ready for prime time, and I don't have any conflicts of interest, and I'm not in a sponsor or anything for SciAS, but the platform that we're using in the clinics right now that's the most comprehensive and helpful is this SciAS, and it's web-based. I have it in the back if anyone wants to take a look at it and demo it, and it's just user-friendly. Within 30 minutes I could really learn to use it, and so I think it's helpful for clinicians. So that's kind of the traditional mental health uses that have been around for a while, developed by people like Barbara Rothbaum and Skip Rizzo. But what I'm really interested in now, which the technology is allowing, is actually sensory and motor feedback, being able to modulate that with a sense of embodiment with avatars. So the motion sensors are really exciting to me. And so I think especially with something like mirror therapy that we use in neuropsychiatry, it allows, virtual reality allows modulation of visual feedback. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with mirror therapy that was developed by Ramachandran, but it's used to actually amputate phantom limbs. So by just a few sessions of seeing movement in a limb, you can actually reduce the sensory, the pain from a phantom limb. So, and it was just discovered a decade or two ago and has been used in practice. And so the technology of VR really allows and is going to allow those kind of interventions to be much more efficiently used. And so I think to keep in mind, I don't know, you know, some of you are developers and thinking about ways to intervene in healthcare and psychiatry. And I think the behavioral conditioning, the implicit classical and operant conditioning that kind of happens beyond awareness, where there's a stimulus, a motor sensory symptom, and then reinforcers, that VR is really going to help with this. And especially because lack of movement in many disorders actually reinforces the symptom. So in things like pain, reflex sympathetic dystrophy, phantom limb, post-stroke hemiparesis, it's the lack of the visual movement that upregulates the sensation and the movement. And once that now we can use VR to change the visual feedback, we can actually create these mirror therapies that have been shown in controlled trials and that we have some evidence for. So you might be asking, so, well, what does this have to do with psychiatry, movement disorders? And actually, what's interesting is the roots of psychiatry are in movement and sensory disorders, sensory symptoms. So Freud and Jung, the kind of the fathers of psychotherapy, actually developed that intervention to treat hysteria. So this was this epidemic, mostly women with trauma histories, although if you're a man, it was called hysteria. And then they developed it because they couldn't find the neurological correlates, and they were quite confused and baffled by this. And it's still remained kind of the roots of psychiatry. So we've been looking at, it's now called, it moved to conversion disorder and then functional neurological disorder. Sorry, my slide got kind of moved over there, but it's now we're calling it functional neurological disorder because we're finding some of the neurological correlates to this. And I think that VR actually, there's going to be a place for intervention using this. And that is what my research right now is about. I'm doing a pilot study where we're looking at people with psychogenic movement disorders and altering the motor feedback. And with Jeremy Valenson in his lab, we've now, actually in the last week, we now have been able to create an avatar embodiment in my office. That's a mirror box. So we basically have in my office, as of a week ago, a mirror box total embodiment avatar that we can customize to the person's symptoms, and we'll be studying if this has any effect on conversion disorder. So here's my email. If anybody, if this dovetails with anybody's interest, and I can support anyone as well, please contact me. And we do have a consortium and other VR research as well. I can tell you that another time.
So we have a couple panelists that move their chairs in the center here. So now we're going to have the question. What time did we go to? What is this?
What time is it now?
Quarter to 8 now.
Okay, you have 15 minutes. 20 minutes.
20 minutes. All right. So, and just to let you know, besides, although Dr. Greenleaf doesn't have a demo because he's involved in so many companies, he can't bring them all. The rest do have demos in the back there, so if you get a chance right after this, it would be good if you see them, because I don't know how long anyone can hang around. So I'm going to start off with a question here. What do we need to get VR as a technology to have widespread adoption within healthcare?
I think the first time that one of our companies or some of the other ones out there establishes a validated 510K class 2 or other format and establishes reimbursement, James, I think you're well down the pathway of doing this. I think that'll make a big difference. I think there's such a broad excitement about this technology that we need to be upwardly compatible with existing reimbursement and regulatory approval processes. Many of the VR startups aren't taking the trouble to do that. I think they need to.
So do you think that they need to start off looking right away at FDA approval? And then, also looking at getting a CPT code right away, or?
I think you have to do both at the same time. I think for many of the companies I see out there, there's both a wellness and a clinical pathway that they can go down. And I've encouraged them to do both, to start the process of queuing up. And it's not that hard. People are very scared about getting FDA approval, but it can be done. It depends on the problem, of course, and the indication the claims you're making. But I think you really need to do both. Get to market, maybe with something that's on the subclinical side, but also start your validation, your clinical processes, and talking with the FDA. The earlier you talk with the FDA, the easier the process is. And start talking, looking for showing the right pathway for reimbursement, bundled payments, and the whole thing.
And does James or Howard or anyone here? Okay.
Yeah, I actually think we have all of the parts here already. And I think just sort of looking at what the adoption rate for our stuff, I think we mostly just need time. The early adopters come in first, the people who are paying the most attention to the cutting edge and paying attention to all the new research. And then I think practically, at least in optometry and ophthalmology, what happens is that people wait and see what if they like it or not, if they have the results. And so that process just takes time. I think it's going to take medicine moves more slowly than other industries. So good adoption rates are slow, but then I think you hit this sort of critical mass where enough people are talking about it, where all of a sudden you'll get wide coverage in the industry. So I think all of the pieces are there for medicine. This hardware is more than cheap enough for the value I think that we can create with it. And so we just need to let people get used to it, let people see it, talk about it at conferences, use it with their patients, and I think the rest will sort of solve itself.
Really quickly, and we'll go to someone else, but do you have FDA approval, or are you applying for FDA approval, and do you have a reimbursement code for your product?
Yeah, so it's all pretty complex, I guess. So we have a plan. I think that the biggest thing is to have a clear plan and to know sort of where you're heading. So we are heading for reimbursement. We have I think the best route is to try to find a CPT code that already matches what you're doing, and then try to make an argument that your system should be covered under this code. And so if you can do that, that's sort of the best thing. And then if it turns out that you can't, or it's obvious that you can't, then I think it's sort of unfortunate, and it's a much longer and harder journey to get a new CPT code in place. But I think in our case, I think we have strong arguments for CPT codes that already exist that should allow us to get it reimbursed in the long run. But the biggest thing that's most important for that is to have large controlled studies, cross-sectional studies. And so that's expensive and takes a long time. And so before that, I think you can enter the market and people will start paying out of pocket. Not everyone will be able to afford it at first or be able to pay out of pocket at first. But I think that's the route you sort of have to go, and if you have to fund yourself, you can get it a large amount of outside money.
Mine is not clinical, so I think the clinical.
I'll make a comment in passing. My VR in medicine has actually been very successful for a long time. We call it medical simulation training. And there's thousands of centers that for years have been using very expensive simulators. They don't call it VR though. They were sort of allergic to the term. They call it medical training, medical simulation. And that's something you can address for a while.
What we just talked about about is VR in treating patients, and there's the other whole side, which is VR and simulation in training the healthcare professionals, and where you do not need a 510K, you do not need I think that what it takes to really get your stuff in there is the fact, how you deal with the fact that these organizations, hospitals, medical service organizations, have tens of thousands of old computers being used. And that's a huge problem, because you have a cool 3D simulation that's very immersive, and you say, what is your graphic card? Oh, we don't have one. Well, what chip are you running? And so we find that to be an issue. So we have to keep on dumbing down in the sense of the fidelity, the richness, to make sure that we can get into organizations. And we do. But it's going to be a climb.
Server-side processing and GLTF.
Yeah, my thought as well, to get clinician adoption, this generation is evidence-based driven medicine. So we need to be thinking big about not only efficacy studies, but effectiveness studies and implementation, and joining with the academic world with doing these effectiveness studies. Is it more effective than something else that we have that's just, is it more cost effective? Is it easier to use? And I think joining with academics and developers in collaborative, innovative ways, I think is really important to think about.
So one of the reasons that I'd be led off with sort of a framework about ROI is because I've been in the VR pain world for 20 years, and we have a lot of clinical evidence. We have 200 plus papers in PubMed. We've got fMRI studies. We've got a lot. But I think the stage that we're at is, of course, we need more studies. I think we need larger studies and all of that, and the cheaper equipment enables that. But it's not, you can't economically just sort of run out and do an N of 10,000 study as a small company. So I think what we're looking at is an era of collaboration, and I think that's what's exciting about meetups and these kinds of environments, as and also Kim mentioned. So we've collaborated with a lot of universities, and I think that the traction that we're seeing is across the board. We're seeing that insurance companies, payers, providers, patients are discontented with the status quo. And VR is bringing a new alternative to that. But in order for us to achieve the promise of what VR can bring, I can't be a technologist in the wilderness. There's a big culture gap between the disruptive, the Silicon Valley disruption and healthcare, which likes stability. And so we need players from both sides of that table to all be sitting at the same table and be aware of what the technology and the potential is. So I would just encourage you. I am very interested in those collaborations, and my company really would love to connect with people who also do the same.
Great. So we have comparative effectiveness, collaboration, training providers, early FDA and reimbursement, and get it out there and show how you're doing in the title term. Great. So great. Thank you. That was great. So next question. Are there applications or processes that are in the current use in healthcare that would be able to move to VR, very quickly? That you've seen that happen, that are sort of basic, that haven't been done yet?
I could mention some. For example, we have a training program, a 3D simulation that teaches healthcare professionals, nurses particularly, what it really means to be in a disaster, and what are the first responders looking for in terms of information and help when there is a disaster, Katrina is the absolute perfect example of the breakdown in communication between the people who came in and the healthcare people who were there. We've done this in 3D, and it's great. It works. We have AI mentors in there helping you. So I think if you took a real 3D of, say, one of the hospitals, say Charity or one of those hospitals, and put into VR and then had them figure out all those logistics issues and, what you package when you want to put somebody in a helicopter, and all those, and how you can just talk with a first responder would be just so much more effective. And doing those in the way they do it now is they get 50 volunteers and scatter them with ketchup, and it is so expensive, and any one person only experiences a small amount and doesn't see the whole thing. It's just not very effective for all this expense. So I think 3D and then VR are the way to do it.
So also, just really quickly, you were saying that the single player simulations that can get the most traction. So with something like that, you think it would be beneficial to have NPCs or AI so that they could do it, so that people could train for these disasters? I know that some of it is cooperation together, but do you think
We do both. I think we have to do both. You have to have the learner go out and meet with all these, actually experience that situation through the NPCs, who are both the victims as well as the other helpers, the aviation folks and so on. But we certainly think that, and we have done this, where you go as a team, you work as a team, and you fan out, and you search for your victims, and then you use the radio and call people for help, so, yeah.
I have 2 pro tips for those who want to get involved in this area. One is 360 video is cheap and easy to do. And there are some things that really lend itself, like the stress inoculation project or some training, where you can capture 360 video and stand up something pretty fast. The other is every medical device company, every pharmaceutical company, it has somebody inside their group right now saying, what's our VR play? What are we going to do about VR medicine? So another way to make a leapfrog and get going and do those large trials is to find in your network who you already know, who is part of a larger group that wants to get involved and help do it. I think that's where success will come from, is bring in those existing medical device companies and existing pharma companies that have the experience and the bankroll to do the large clinical trials and bring something out. But they need you as entrepreneurs to help them do it.
Yeah, I have a project for somebody. I think emotion regulation skills training. So there's a whole packaged treatment that was developed by Marshall Linehan called dialectical behavior therapy, that actually we have great data on effectiveness for many disorders, as well as neurobiological correlates of it actually normalizing the brain. And I think VR for learning and training is, you don't need to go to a psychotherapist in a group to be learning these skills. There's much more effective ways and cost effective. And actually Marshall Linehan, who developed it, is looking for somebody who wants to develop this VR. So if anyone wants to do that, let me talk to me.
Are you talking, is this with people with like,
Any emotion.
Use or?
Yeah, any emotion. Oh, it's a pan diagnostic in mental health, psychiatric, and most psychiatric illnesses have emotion dysregulation on some level.
What I think is the biggest market, that affects the most people, that have the biggest market base or something. Right. Drug abuse,
Yeah, I mean, the foundation of almost all intensive treatment programs now is dialectical behavior therapy. So I think it could be applied to almost anything. It's used for bipolar, chronically suicidal people, chronic pain, eating disorders, addiction. I mean, it's pretty pan-diagnostic, so it'd be useful.
The one thing I'd like to point out is that, so we know that in general, across healthcare, basically 20% of the population uses 80% of the resources. And the really cool thing about VR is that it helps the people who need it the most. So this is true in education, this is true in training, it's true in healthcare. The people who are not performing well in the current system are the ones who are going to get the biggest benefit. That's fantastic. We don't have a lot of treatments for people who really need it the most. And so in psychology, people, you have people who don't even want to go and get PTSD therapy because they have so many, they have, so much of an aversion to doing that. We can help them. We can help a lot of people who, need more services. And I think this is what we have is a perfect storm of the Affordable Care Act, and the systems are breaking down with opioids and all the other things. Business as usual is not working. So this is a fantastic opportunity, and we can help the people who need it the most.
Question for Howard.
Listen to what you said. It sounds like what you're saying is, if you're the worst off, you're going to benefit the most. Are you also saying that it will help you for the first 20% or 50% or 60% of the problem, but after that it's not, the returns are going to tail off, and you've got to use other methods?
No, I think, well, interesting question. I think that the methods you apply, nestled in that, I think you have to build applications intentionally for the culture, for the people, for the background, for the capabilities, prior knowledge and all of that, for those people to be successful. You might build a very different application for somebody who is, so we have a mindfulness application, and it uses a biosensor. If I was going to build that for advanced meditators, I would build something different, right? Or I might make it, make the quality of the experience much more challenging, etc. But we can build applications that scaffold people and take them from low performers to high performers. I believe that everybody has the potential to be a high-performing, healthy person, and that's my goal with using VR. So I don't think it's just for the bottom 20%, but I think that we as a society need to deal with the problem that that's where the consumption is, and that's where the costs are.
So yeah, I guess I don't have sort of specific things, but I can talk a little bit about how I think about VR, and sort of think about how it might be useful in healthcare. So, I think in general the brain is often working in a feedback loop. And so the example earlier of the campaign, that's sort of a classic example of interrupting that feedback loop with visual input, so that the brain sort of changes its behavior. There have been some interesting talks recently where there's a guy who made a jacket that has electrical stimulus that electrically, there's a grid, 25 by 25 grid on your back, and you can map data that your brain can figure out lots of different kinds of data and sort of how to use that. And so I think a lot of the interesting work that people are doing now is showing that it doesn't really matter which part of this loop you interrupt. So in some cases they're telling people, for instance, to take on a pose of feeling confident and start to feel more confident. So you can start by interrupting that loop by changing your behavior, or you can start by changing what they're seeing, what's coming in from their senses. And so VR and all these sensors, so gesture tracking, hand tracking, eye tracking, biosensors, the ability to control accurately what's going into their eyes, the ability to control accurately what's going into their ears, eventually haptic. We're getting more and more and more control over the range of human stimulus. And we're getting more and more and more accurate at measuring the response. And so I sort of see this whole system as a really interesting way to sort of figure out how the brain works and modify it to work better. And I think there's so many applications that we haven't thought of yet, and there's so many that people are working on now that are really, really interesting.
Great, so we have emotion regulation, personalized medicine, immersive simulation, 360 video and device companies, and sort of getting into the loop of stimulus response, which is a great segue into the final question, probably on them, before we have some time for the audience. Does VR remap the brain for permanent effects?
So yeah, I'd be happy to start with this one. So we are basically doing this. We're measuring people's vision, figuring out what's going on, and then so in the case of suppression, which is something we pay a lot of attention to, so we can, usually the suppression has been learned at a pretty young age, and it's happening very early in the visual system, so it's probably happening in Q1. And so we have cases where people have learned to do this suppression under normal seeing conditions, and the critical age sort of popped up because what I think is sort of happening there is that by the age of 9 or 10, your brain has sort of seen almost all of the normal seeing conditions it's going to see in the real world, and has developed rules for them. And so I think the critical sort of finding that allowed us to change this was that we're presenting seeing conditions which they have never seen before and which don't exist in the real world. And so, by increasing the signal going to the weak eye, we're creating conditions that have never existed that the brain doesn't have a rule for yet. And so it makes it easier for us to generate a new rule, or to sort of teach the brain a new way of dealing with this new situation. And so, although we don't have sort of the direct evidence that we're permanently changing, some earlier, lower level part of the brain, we're pretty sure that this is probably what's happening because there's a lot of evidence that suppression is taking place in that area, and we have a lot of good evidence that we're able to change how suppression works. In kids, it's a lot easier, but even in adults.
Yes. And we're doing a study right now at Stanford at the Williams Lab where we're working with 400 patients, longitudinal study, teaching them weight management skills and mood regulation skills. And we're using VR as environmental stimulants to evoke different neurocircuits in the brain. And we're using fMRI imaging to track the changes as they learn motion regulation and weight management skills through CBT. We will see what changes in the brain as they learn these skills. In this case, VR is a tool to evoke the neurocircuitry, but it's also very powerful information. But it's going to take these large size studies to really show what changes in the brain. But because we see clinical results, can we just describe some results that we've seen already? We know that something's changing.
Yes.
I hope so. I asked the question, so I don't know, but I hope so.
So if it does remap the brain, where do you think is the biggest, where do you think the application would have the most impact on society? What would be the one that would really help our healthcare system, which is completely broken, and now in the transition from a volume to value, where the 20% having 80% costs? If it doesn't remap the brain, you say yes, where do you think, oh, I guess you're going to say pain, but I'd like to hear what everyone would think would be really the app that would make the most impact, both on the quality of care and on the cost of care.
I think, of course, I ended up doing pain because we did a lot of other things. We've done PTSD application, exposure therapy, lifestyle changes, and those are all great. I think there's so much potential across the board. But I think that it will be interesting when we stop thinking about VR as a group and we start thinking about it in terms of specific application areas. I think that we may be fast approaching that, but I think that for pain relief touches every aspect. There's 100 million Americans deal with pain on a daily basis, chronic pain. And it touches every aspect of all of medicine. And I think what's interesting is that it leads to a lot of anxiety, hopelessness. People, if you have fibromyalgia, life sucks. And it sucks for you and your spouse and your family. And if you have PTSD, it affects your whole society. So I think what's really exciting about VR, you mentioned sort of the treatment model. The treatment model is killing our healthcare system. We spend 17% of our GDP, $3 trillion a year, and we have the worst outcomes of any developed nation in the United States. And I believe it's because of an overemphasis on treatment, and we're not doing these other things. So for me, I think it's a comprehensive approach that really changes that equation is the most exciting part.
Worst outcomes and highest per capita spend.
Yeah.
I think the potential, if we could impact at the social level, we're thinking anger management, depression, a whole slew of them. And so from the brain point of view, it's kind of the amygdala, hippocampus, frontal cortex area. Targeting brain, one doesn't think about targeting brain changes, but targets outcomes. But that would be where I think we would have the greatest social impact.
Telemedicine. VR is a fantastic telemedicine platform, so reaching out in wide areas. Behavior change we've talked about. I would say, Mike, that the most potential strong impact is in the mood disorders, anxiety, depression, wellness side of things, and everything that is involved in medical technology requires adherence. And I think VR is a fantastic adherence generation machine because you can show your future self, you can show to the patient or to the individual the consequences of not adhering to the medication. And everything else falls apart if we don't have adherence. So I think that's where I can see the extent of doctors promoting adherence for both wellness and clinical care.
I think ultimately all the impact is going to come from reducing the cost and increasing quality of the care. I think that's possible with VR because we can replace a lot of things that today require people to be actively involved with things that are automated. And I think a lot of people in medicine are sort of concerned about this.
You're gonna cut jobs.
Well, yeah, that's what they're concerned about, but I think it's not a real fear because there's way more care that has to be done than can ever be done by the people who know how to do it today. And this is very true in the eye care industry, where there's just way more people who need care, and currently most people don't get it because they can't afford it. So I think we could make healthcare professionals 10 times more efficient and still not have enough healthcare professionals. And I think that's what we should be trying to do.
Yeah, I'm thinking any use that would decrease violence would decrease trauma in our society and maybe give us hope for our species surviving. So interpersonal skills training, negotiation and conflict management, and emotion regulation.
Yeah, that have a ripple effect.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Well, now I'm going to open up the panel to questions from the audience, and there's already one already.
Thanks, Pierre.
Hi, my name is Raghuva. Founded a company, Connect, 5 years ago in diabetes management, and I helped involved with healthcare, HTF for a while. But been a recent convert to VR, and it's, boy, what an experience. I mean, it's phenomenal. But one thing that's kind of been on top of my mind, and when I see this, all of this good stuff that can come out of it, I'm wondering, I've got 2 kids, they play on the iPhone a lot, and when I take away the iPhone, it's like difficult to see from virtual reality to reality, right? So what some of the things, and I love the games out there, but when I take off my goggles, right, what happens? So has there been any study, and the clinicians can help me with that, is how much of this virtual reality that, have the negative consequences of this and stuff like that? So it'd be good to get that answer. So I'm concerned about it as a parent as well as
You're absolutely right, and there are groups looking into this. There's going to certainly be families where the parents work through jobs today, so the kids get parked in front of the yard. We're very concerned about the vestibular-ocular developing visual cortex. The fact that we're focusing on something in the near field of view instead of truly looking at something focusing out there. We don't know. There are certainly some positive effects that can be built into some VR systems that can help strengthen but in terms of the deleterious effects, we don't know. And it's something I think we need to, I'm encouraging the VR industry to come up with some standards. Now, Oculus does, and some of the other manufacturers have followed their lead to say it should not be used for a certain amount of time, or if you're a certain age. That's not based on science. It's based on Facebook not wanting kids to be on their system and Facebook owning Oculus. So the science doesn't tell us what to do. The science warns us, and we're concerned about some things, but we don't know yet. And actually, I'm meeting with a group tomorrow that's putting together a major research study on this issue. But it's a big project, and I'm not sure we have answers right away.
I totally agree with that, and this is not diametrically opposed to it, but I think that there is a social, it's interesting to see what your children will be like because they've grown up with VR. And the interesting thing is, that to me, is there's sort of a generational thing that happened with people. I grew up with the TV. I was lucky enough to be on that cusp, and I can understand what a computer is, and I can use it. My parents, they whirled a mouse above their head. So I think that while we definitely need to know the sort of physiological impacts of it, I think kids are so adaptable. And I think we need to do that responsibly as parents for them, but I don't think we really know what the next generation is going to be and how they're going to use this technology. So that's partially exciting and partially really frightening. And I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I'm a proponent of having the FDA involved in monitoring safety. I think it is a big question, and I'm quite concerned about the kids, especially with neglect going on, but it is going to happen. So I think we need to be cautious and assess risk properly.
And I could add a little bit about just the visual risks part of this. I heard a lot less about sort of the other potential risks. But the main concern with people's vision, especially on kids, is that basically in a VR headset, you're always focusing at a fixed distance. So some headsets is close up, some headsets is far away. But your eyes, when they converge at a point, so if I look at my finger close up, both my eyes are converging to that point. And if I look at far away, both my eyes are pointing straight forward. So there's a relationship your brain knows between these two things. And in the real world, if I look far away, I'm always focusing far away. If I look close up, I'm always focusing close up. And this relationship is sort of used by the brain to figure out how to focus your eyes and where to point your eyes. And so in VR, this relationship totally breaks down. You're focusing at a constant distance, and your eyes are converging near, far, and anywhere in between. And so I've asked quite a few vision scientists and ophthalmologists about this question. And I think there isn't a consensus, and it's true that we don't really know. But what they often bring up to me is that this relationship breaks down anyway as people get older. Because, basically the relationship between your eyes can't focus as well as you get older. And so this relationship naturally breaks down. And so there's a lot of evidence about what happens when this happens. And people learn to compensate pretty well. And so I know a lot of people, I think we know that we're going to probably, given VR experiences that are not designed with this in mind, going to be changing people's vision, especially if they're younger, where it's easier, under that critical age where the brain's more plastic and can change more quickly. And so I think, but most people seem to think that it's probably not a huge deal. That's a lot of qualifiers. So.
Another question?
I was just wondering if you guys could elaborate why you go down the B2B route as opposed to the B2C route, especially with such cheap options such as Google Cardboard or Daydream VR. And I know you mentioned that you said focus on enterprise. So.
Well, actually, there's a whole bunch of different ways people are getting to market. I think you're doing be the clinician, and the clinicians are going to the customer. But there are people who are coming up with a lot of wellness apps that are on Google Cardboard. And our stress inoculation project will be on So we're seeing a variety of it. I think it depends on the application. Howard, would you say you're B2C right now?
Well, I mean, we're still early, I have to say. I mean, in 5 years, we're going to look back at this and sort of laugh. I hope. I think, so I would say that I look at VR as a constellation. It's a range of technologies. We are using the PC-based technologies because you get the best experience. And for going B2B, for enterprise, you want people to have their first experience as high quality as you can. There's also, it reduces stress. If you have more visual distortion, if you have chromatic aberrations, if you have all sorts of problems with your HMD, you're going to compound the problem. So the higher quality experience you give your kid, the better. But you still have accommodation problems and all of the things that you mentioned. But I would say that we look at it as a constellation. It's not an either or, but it's a now we do this and how they use it.
I can tell you that the simulations that we develop, we put up videos and there's information about it, and we get a lot of individual, particularly students, who want to buy it, just B2C. And our issue is we're not set up for it. And when you really start selling to individuals, everybody has slightly different needs, so you've got to make sure you've got some kind of a critical mass to sell that will satisfy them. But I think the biggest thing is we just want to set up in our product or our infrastructure to go out that way. But I think there's a market for that.
I'm a former perioperative nurse, and I see absolutely huge opportunity here for the surgical patient. And I also see an angle in that if this were used for pre-op teaching for, say, the total joint patient, it would be no different than what we used to do. They do pre-op classes that the patient goes to. Is that?
So we actually encountered exactly that. Pre-surgery, this was not like total joint, but it was a surgical supplies company that asked us to create a simulation to teach the patient simple things, how to bathe with chlorhexidine the day before. And that really was a B2C kind of thing, but going through them. It's hard to explain why it stops, but I can tell you that this particular app got blocked because they tried to put it through the clinics and the hospitals, and the healthcare professionals just did not want to deal with change from their PowerPoint and their approach. But if they had given it directly to the patient, they would use it.
I've talked about our project at the Children's Hospital as a stress inoculation project, but it really could also be called a patient education project and an informed consent project. I mean, we're taking everything that's going to happen to the patient, capturing it, and allowing them and the family members to go through it. And then we'll build out the curriculum behind it. Right now, we're trying to reduce anticipatory stress, but we'll also have it be, here's why we're doing this, and here's what's going on in the surgical process. So VR, and especially I think it's pretty cheap to do it with 360 video, is a fantastic patient and family orientation technology. So you're absolutely right.
So I'm sorry that we're out of time now, and so I want to everyone give a hand for this fantastic panel. Maybe you want to put a little bit of questions and maybe little demos, but we're going to have to get out of here pretty soon, right? So, yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.